Hey, what's up everyone? Fast Freddy here. We're talking about the Nader Hater today. Finally, 1965 Chevy Corvair race car build. Let's talk about the car. The Nader Hater. Why did we build the Nader Hater? There's a lot of things that went into the concept of this car. I wanted to build a race car to promote our shop. This has been a brainchild of mine for a long time. Since I got into cars, really, I kind of fell in love with the second generation Corvair body style. Very classic, cool lines, European styled, unique car. It was just something different, but I always thought it just needed more. So I had a concept kind of rattling around in my brain for the better part of a decade, really. It kind of all came to fruition after I went to Road America in 2015, and I got really inspired by road racing. At that time, I had my 1967 Dodge Dart. It was more of a street strip car, but I did compete at the racetrack with it, and it was definitely the wrong formula for road racing. So after that event, I came home and I decided it was time to build a real race car. One that I could call my own, one that I could hang the shop banner on, and really show people what we like to do here. So what we did is we took a 1965 Corvair and completely gutted the car. We cut all the floors out of it, every last little bit of sheet metal that we knew we weren't going to use. That allowed us to build a custom frame for the car. And in doing so, I decided the best thing to do was partner with a good friend of mine, Trent Lewis from Midwest Metalworks. Him and I have wanted to build a cool car together for a long time. And this was the perfect opportunity for us to kind of showcase both of our shop's talents and bring it into a unique platform that hasn't necessarily been done before. There's been some front-engine Corvairs done before. There's been a ton of mid-engine Corvairs done before. Lots of different road racing Corvairs done, but nothing quite like this concept before. So when Trent and I sat down and kind of hatched this whole scheme, we knew we needed to start with a clean sheet of paper. And we knew we wanted a very good, sound, stable platform, but also one that wasn't completely off the charts and so radical that it was going to take us a decade to build. So the foundation of this car is Corvette C5 front and rear suspension. So that's where I started. I went to a Corvette salvage yard and got a front and rear suspension assembly. And after we gutted the car, it went up onto a chassis table. We set the suspension assemblies right at axle center line. We set the drivetrain in where it needed to be. And we've got an interface adapter kit from a company called Dobberton Performance for the rear suspension. And that allowed us to get all of our geometry exactly where it needed to be. So that way we knew that when the car hit the road, we weren't going to have all kinds of challenges with suspension, steering, alignment, handling. We knew we would have something that was going to be very tunable. It was going to be able to drive on the street very well, but ultimately it was going to be a track performer. You know, that was the whole concept of this car, was to make sure that this car grips the road, it handles, it steers, it stops, it does everything that you want it to do, and it has all the performance that you'd ever need, and in obviously a very small package. That's another reason why I chose the Corvair, because it's a short wheelbase and it lent itself to very cool styling cues with hand-laid fiberglass fender flares. Those were actually borrowed off of L88 Corvette, and I grafted the fender flares into the bodywork to give it that kind of low, wide stance. Was able to fit 18 by 11 wheels on all four corners with 315 tires, so lots of grip at the track, very well balanced. One of the other very important things is we wanted 50-50 weight bias in the car, and we were able to achieve that by the placement of the engine, the transmission, the rear suspension, and the fuel cell. We actually hit our mark exactly dead center at 50-50 weight split. So the car is extremely well balanced. It's very centered. I actually sit exactly 88 inches from the front of the car and 88 inches from the rear of the car. That was just a little bit of dumb luck, but based on where everything laid out, that's exactly where I sit. And laid out the dash in a way where it's very simple, very logical, very visible. I didn't want any hood scoops. I didn't want any extraneous visual clutter on the car. I wanted it very clean and simple. Having it out at the track, we've got 1 season under our belt at this point. Learned a ton about the car. Right out of the box, the car performed incredibly well. Very happy with out of the box performance with this. There's a few tweaks that we need to make. Obviously, when you take what was a rear engine air-cooled car and you put a 600 horse LS powered machine up front in a vehicle that was not designed for any airflow, i.e. there's no grill in the car, there's a lot of limiting factors that create excessive underhood heat. So there's a couple things that we got to work through over the course of this winter that we're going to correct. Besides that, the car performed flawlessly. Was able to use the car at the Optima Battery Ultimate Street Car event at Road America last August in 90-degree heat, and it did extremely well, other than getting a little warm inside the car. So a couple, minor revisions that we need to do, but overall, extremely satisfied with the performance, the handling, the braking, everything is living up to what I had hoped that it would be in a car. I always thought this would just be such a cool platform to build an all-out race car. And I was always inspired by the Yenko Stinger cars, which that was Don Yenko's kind of first relationship with Chevrolet performance and racing. So he did some hopped up versions of the Yenko. They called them the Yenko Stingers. I borrowed some styling from the Yenko Stinger. You can see the stripe in the car. It was kind of an homage to the Yenko Stinger. What I liked about that, it was a very competitive vehicle, but again, it just lacked the performance and the look that I was after. I knew that this body style had so much more to it. And so when I got back from Road America in 2015, I started searching around for a Corvair. And I knew I didn't want to take a really nice, clean car and cut it all up. So what I ended up doing is just scouring Craigslist and actually found this vehicle here locally, just down the road from me. It was a $700 parts car, and it was just a total bucket of bolts. I think it might have been used as a stock car back in the day because the quarter panels were all beat up on it, and this thing was basically just left for dead. But I knew it had the bones of what I wanted to build out of it. So again, I sat down with Trent and we kind of walked about 100 circles around the car and started brainstorming and coming up with a plan of how we wanted to attack this, what materials we wanted to use, and just the concept in general. The cool thing about Trent's background is he is trained in metal fabrication, welding, and he has a background in SolidWorks and 3D CAD. So he was able to come up with a complete frame for this car that dovetailed perfectly into the Corvette suspension. So what we did is we went on SolidWorks and we designed frame rails, and we designed a main hoop structure for the center of the car and a rear frame rail structure that incorporated all of our suspension, our motor mounts, our transmission mounts, and all of our frame rails. We wanted a very stable and robust platform to tie the suspension assemblies together. And that's what we ended up with. This car is extremely stout. The only flex is in the suspension itself. We went to QA1 suspension, and we've got their double adjustable coilovers on all 4 corners. I went to FOT and got an 1.5 inch front sway bar, an 1.25 inch rear sway bar. Basically sourced the best upgraded components that we could get for this Corvette C5 platform. So, some of the finer points of the engine. Obviously, to package an LS motor into a vehicle that was not designed to have an engine up front created some challenges. Number one, these engine bays had these huge inner fenders, and those we knew immediately had to go. This is actually where the trunk was, so you had your master cylinder and just a big deep well in here, spare tire, things like that. And we knew that all had to go. So plasma cutter, we basically just smoked the whole inner workings of this whole tub out of here so we could set the suspension cradle in where it needed to be. We set our engine where it needed to be, and then basically just started working the numbers backwards from there. I knew I needed a big heavy duty race radiator, so this was sourced through Northern Radiator out of Minnesota, and it's got a built-in oil cooler. It's got 3,300 CFM fans. Worked the cold air intake tubing so we can get cold fresh air from up front out of the engine bay. Got a JLT oil separator and did some custom coolant hoses. Built a custom power steering cooler because at the track with 315s, power steering system generates a ton of heat. So we needed to get rid of that heat. And so we put a massive power steering cooler up front, sent the rack out to turn 1 power steering and had that all upgraded. And then keeping with the theme of ease and durability, I used a Corvette front drive system, so that way all of our spacing was correct. We used an ATI balancer on the front of the engine, and that runs the serpentine drive. So it's an off-the-shelf Corvette alternator, power steering pump. So that way, you know, if you happen to be at the track and you lose an alternator, you lose a power steering pump, you're not dead in the water. You can go to, you know, your neighborhood parts store and actually get something off the shelf, so you're not wasting your entire weekend trying to hunt down parts. That was another big thing. I wanted to build as much reliability into this car as possible. So I tried to use as many off-the-shelf parts that I knew would be durable and reliable. And again, I wasn't gonna have air conditioning in here, so I didn't need a big fancy elaborate serpentine drive system with all the bells and whistles. It's just, again, everything that you need and nothing you don't. We were able to actually utilize the factory Corvette fuel rail covers too, which helps clean up the engine bay. I had to do quite a bit of extensive work in modifying the cowl and the windshield wiper assembly. It actually does have functional windshield wipers. This is an aftermarket windshield wiper motor from Newport Engineering that I was able to graft into the factory wiper system because I wanted to be able to drive this car on the street. If I get caught in the rain, you can flip the wipers on. And then, you know, certain other things, you know, once we got all the big pieces laid out in here, the radiator, the cold air intake, I wanted to just kind of clean things up here too. So we built a custom front valance panel. some custom inner fender aprons to keep all the road debris out of the inside of the engine bay. So we did some custom bead rolling, and then we took these panels and covered them in Raptor bed liner to give them a nice durable finish, so that way if you know, get any grease or oil on here, it's a super easy cleanup process. And it just, again, adds to the cleanliness and kind of the sanitary look of the engine bay. I'm big, again, on keeping things as clean as possible. I didn't want a bunch of hoses and wiring and things like that. I just wanted everything to kind of go away and boil it down to its basic elements. So this is about as clean and tidy as you can get an engine bay, especially in a vehicle that was designed to not have an engine up front. So very happy with how this came out. Again, now that we've got it on the road and got a season under our belt, one thing that I am going to do is add a little plenum in here to get to add a heat extractor and get rid of some of this engine bay heat and bring that up through the hood. But that was about the only thing that we determined once the car got on the track, was that we got to figure out a way to get rid of some of this extra heat, because once it gets trapped in here, then it goes back into the passenger compartment, and it gets a little warm in there on a 90-degree day on the track. But other than that, yeah, this thing is dialed, ready to go. So that covers the engine bay and the drivetrain. Let's take a peek inside and see what we got going on in there. All right, so moving on to the interior. Again, the whole concept of this was functionality. Wanted it a very basic but visual layout for all of my data, keeping it kind of traditional old school race car. I love analog gauges, and so that's why I use the Autometer Sport Comps. Got TAC, speedo, water temp gauge, fuel, oil pressure, volts, oil temp, and then actually have a differential temp gauge because there is a differential cooler built into this too, and that's on this toggle switch. So if that starts to heat up on the track, I can just flip that switch and it'll actually turn on a circulation pump and a cooling fan on a differential cooler. So if I get excessive heat in the diff, I can just turn that on and cool it right off. I wanted a master kill switch that was easily within arm's reach, so that if there's any kind of electrical issues on the track or on the road or whatever, just flip that thing off. Just super easy to get to. I wanted a tilt steering column just for a little adjustability, and then it's got turn signals incorporated in here, you know, to help with obviously, you know, in a street car situation, you're gonna have to have turn signals. So, and then one other thing to help bring the steering wheel closer to me is I added a quick release steering wheel disconnect coupler. It helps get in and out of the vehicle as well. But that way, you know, you just snap it right back on there, and then it brings it a little bit closer to you, so you're really hunkered right down in this car. Everything is right where you want it. You're kind of right in the middle of the action. Nice short throw shifter. This is again a Tremec T56 Magnum 6-speed with a McLeod twin disc clutch, so very short, precise shifts. Everything's right where you want it. The pedal assembly is right where you want it. Everything is, you know, you can heel toe shift. The gas pedal, I used another Willwood pedal just like the brake and clutch pedal for my gas, so everything kind of matches. And again, here's my brake bias gauges here, so you can actually see that in real time when I hit the brakes. You can see where the pressures are, which is really nice. And then this is the brake bias adjuster itself. So again, when you're on the track, it's just a turn of a knob and you can change your bias from front to rear, and you can see what effect that's having. I also plumbed in the master cylinder reservoir so I could actually see that at a moment's notice. If there happens to be a leak or something like that, I can actually see the levels of the reservoir, front and rear brakes, and the clutch reservoir right there. Again, just keeping with the super functional theme. Also have a drift brake incorporated in here. This is through ASD Motorsports. It's kind of dual purpose. You know, you can hoon around with it. It'll lock up your rear brakes, but it also serves as a rear parking brake too, because I didn't want a bunch of cables and things like that actuating the rear parking brake. So this will actually serve as a rear park brake too. So just kind of one little thing that I added to just kind of jazz up the interior a little bit, and it's kind of a conversation piece. A lot of people kind of get a kick out of that, and they, oh, what does that do? What's that for? Is that a what is that thing anyway? Well, you know, it's kind of two purpose. It's a drift brake and it's a park brake. So, but then yeah, moving on to the seats, Sparco Grid 2s. This was literally about the only seat that was going to fit inside this car. Obviously space constraints with the engine set back, and this big transmission tunnel. This is all custom built by Trent Lewis at Midwest Metal Works. He also built this custom mount for the drift brake, the bell housing flange. All of this tin work was all done by Trent. Him and I laid out and bent up the roll bar. This is all TIG welded by Trent, Midwest Metal Works. It's 1.5 DOM tubing, 120 wall, so it's all SCCA compliant. It's a full halo, and it incorporates rear bars, a rear harness bar, and it really helps stiffen the chassis and makes you feel really safe in the event that this thing did get flipped on its lid. You know you're protected. We got a center divider bar and then a wink mirror, so you got full visibility out the back. And so fire extinguisher mount here in case you get into trouble at the track too. That's just pull the pin and you got access to the fire extinguisher. And then I don't know if you can see it, but the battery is mounted right back here, and again that was for weight bias as well, just kind of help offset the driver's weight over on the passenger side. Everything's super functional and easy to get to. And then moving on to these coolers in the back, you'll see that I incorporated NACA ducts into the quarter glass. This is actually a Lexan window, and I built custom mounts for the Lexan window so I could bolt the NACA duct. So you'll see that there's two cooling ducts here. The upper duct on this side goes to a helmet cooler that's stubbed in there, and on the lower side is a rear brake cooler for the passenger side, and as well on the driver's side there's a rear brake cooler, and then the other tube on top of it goes to the differential cooler that's right behind up over the axle, and we can get to that later in just a little bit here. And then we built a custom firewall panel for the back too, just to kind of keep the fumes from the fuel tank and the differential cooler out of the cabin. So yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Again, clean, simple, functional, everything you need and nothing you don't. And that's how I wanted to keep it. So keep it simple, stupid. All right, so moving on to the rear, let's go check out the fuel cell and the differential. Back end of the car. So biggest thing that you see here is the ATL fuel cell. This is a 22-gallon cell, and it's got a Bosch EFI pump mounted in it that feeds our Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator. That feeds fuel to the motor, obviously. We got our sending unit for the gauge. And then what you see here is the differential cooler. What you don't see is the circulation pump that's mounted down below. So that pushes the hot oil up into the cooler. And again, with that switch on the dash, I can just click on that fan and click on the cooler, and that'll circulate all the hot differential fluid. and cool it off immediately. So, you know, when you're on the track for a long session, it really helps keep that oil cool. It won't break it down nearly as quick. And so there's kind of a lot going on back here, but you can also see the custom wheel tubs. These are actually hand-formed aluminum wheel tubs built by Trent Lewis at Midwest Metalworks. That took quite a bit of doing to get those things incorporated into the rear frame rails and then tucked nicely to the quarter panels. He built a nice flange that those tie into, and then built some nice closeout panels with a really cool bead detail that he built on his Pullmax machine. Again, just, you know, more things that, you know, help seal off all the dirt and debris, so you don't get all that, you know, road debris kicking up in the back end of the car. And then it's a really elaborate 2x4 frame rail system that's actually incorporated into the rear truss right where the original drivetrain was mounted. So we kept that truss back here in the back of the car for rigidity and to really help stabilize the back end of the car. This serves as our body mount as well. And then I hung a hood prop, essentially just repurposed a hood prop rod, and that's for the trunk prop, because the torsion springs had to go just because of everything that's going on here. So the deck lid doesn't support itself anymore, so that was the purpose of the trunk prop back there. But again, just clean, simple, functional, everything you need and nothing you don't. So that's basically the name of the game with this car. And so yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for all the technical details of the car. Just want to kind of talk about a couple of the styling things, and we'll get into that next. Okay, so keeping with the Yenko Stinger theme, obviously we have the homage to the Yenko Stinger with the stripe, but a lot of people wonder about what the Stage 5 Clinger is. Well, the Stinger cars, they made them Stage 1 through Stage 4. And the Stage 1 was essentially just kind of a warmed over factory car. And then when you got up to the Stage 4, that was the full-blown SCCA Trans Am race car. And this car is just one little notch above the Stage 4. So keeping with that theme, we went to Stage 5, and it's a Clinger. So Stinger, Clinger, kind of has a few different references, but one of them being that this thing really clings to the track with the wide tires, the lowered stance and all that. So I just thought it was kind of fitting to take it that one next step up to the Stage 5. So that's kind of a little thing that we did just to kind of make this car a little unique and different. We had a graphic designer come in and actually make this custom logo for it, and we got some artwork. We actually have some t-shirts that go along with it too. So yeah, just something cool, unique, and different, just to kind of make this car set out from the pack just a little bit more than the rest. So up at the front of the car, I wanted something just a little bit different than the rest. I really like these halos that we used in here. These are from Redline Lumetronics, and there's actually a number of different colors that you can do, but just to give it that little bit more menacing look, I usually run it with the red halos just to kind of give it a little extra attitude. The other thing that we did is we took this, the same vinyl wrap that we used on the Yenko Stinger stripe. We actually wrapped the bumpers with it too. Mark, my vinyl guy, was able to figure out a way to wrap this and keep the grain in a horizontal direction. So it really just kind of pulls everything all together nicely. I didn't want a lot of shiny, bright work on the car. I definitely didn't want to chrome the bumpers. We tried to paint them at first and it just didn't look quite right, so actually wrapping them, that was the perfect look to kind of tie in with all the other trim and kind of muted accents on the car. And it also pulls in together nicely with the wheels. These are a Forge Line Laguna 18 by 11 wheel, and they kind of have they play off of that Mini Light, which was a very popular Trans Am racing wheel back in the day, and a lot of the Yanko Stinger cars use the Mini Light wheel. So it's just kind of an exaggerated concept of that Mini Light, and I think Forge Line just killed it with the styling, and it just lends itself really well to the overall appearance and styling of this car in general. So, and then lastly, the fiberglass fender flares. These were actually borrowed from an L88 Corvette, and since there's a lot of Corvette, what I would call DNA in the car already with the suspension, the drivetrain, and things like that, these L88 Corvette flares actually lent themselves really well to the styling of the car. Those cars originally had much wider hips on them, and so by default they had a larger rear flare on them on the quarter panel than they did on the fender, and that actually worked out very well with the proportions of this car too. So it took quite a bit of doing to kind of cut them in and graft them into the body, and then fiberglass them into the fenders and into the quarter panels, but it just kind of helps give it that, you know, extra wide, aggressive, mean looking stance. So it's kind of one of the first things that you notice when the car is coming down the road is these big wide fender flares on it. So just kind of helps pack that punch and just give it a little bit of extra attitude. So really happy with how these things came out. So the hood, wanted to keep this as simple as possible. So I just got a set of track spec heat extractors here for the hood just to get rid of some of that heat. And then I wanted a clean and simple hood pin design too, something that was very aerodynamic. So these are from AeroCatch, really super simple operation. You just click them, pop up, releases it from your pins, and then you got immediate access to the engine bay. I didn't want a hood latch that could potentially fail, or cables or levers or things like that. Just very clean, simple, and smooth. So it does the trick perfectly. So the last little piece of detail that I want to talk about on the car is this custom front valance panel that we had made. Basically, you know, when this car is at events and shows and things like that, you know, it usually has a pretty big mob around it, so we wanted to have something to kind of show off the details of the car, so at a glance people can come up and kind of see what componentry is used in here. So this is kind of a detail breakdown of the car with the name of the vehicle, the Nader Hater, which, you know, we should probably talk about that for a second too. A lot of people don't quite understand the Nader Hater concept. Well, for the people that do know, Ralph Nader wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed, which was kind of an attack on the auto industry in general, but he did more or less single out the Corvair. And after the book was published, it pretty much meant the end of the Corvair production at that point. And so this is this is my kind of little homage to Ralph Nader and his killing of the Corvair. So Freddies Rod Shop and Midwest Metalworks present the Nader Hater, and we also did a little QR code here. So if you are at a show and you see the car, you can actually walk up right to it with your smartphone and click this button, and it'll go right to the website, and you can see the entire build of the car from start to finish, from when we first got the shell to getting it on the chassis table, to the layout of the suspension, the full fabrication of the frame, all the interior panels, body paint, wiring, final assembly, everything. You can go right to fastfreddiesrodshop.com, find the Nader Hater, and check out all the build pics. So thanks for watching. Hope you got a little takeaway and got a little more knowledge on this car and why it was built. So we'll see you next time. Gonna get tight in about 3, 2, 1 here. Ah! Oh my God! Is this real? Is this real life?
Holy shit!
A very surreal moment in time. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Damn near emotional about it. It's been a long time coming. Dude! We got a race car.
Holy shit!
It's only gonna get cooler from here.
Hear that little squeak going into 4?
It spun a lot in second.